Hello, friends. Welcome back to the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm Jill Sullivan, your host and one of the co-founders of the While We're Waiting ministry. This is a podcast of stories of devastating loss and grief and heartbreak and struggle, and stories of hope and healing and faith and, yes, even joy. Underlying every conversation is the hope we have in Jesus Christ, which makes it possible to not just survive the loss of a child, but to live well while we're waiting to see them again in heaven one day. You can learn more about our ministry and the free bereaved parent retreats we host by visiting our website at www.whilewe'rewaiting.org. Welcome to episode number 201. Before we get into our conversation, I just wanted to say a quick word of thanks to those who have recently left ratings or reviews on the podcast. I appreciate that so much because that does some kind of magic with the internet algorithms and helps others find the podcast. So thank you. My good friend Susan Morrison is my guest today. Her daughter Miranda was a young wife and mother when she began experiencing some puzzling health issues and was ultimately diagnosed with glioblastoma brain cancer. In the first half of this two-part episode, Susan talks about walking that difficult journey with her daughter, the crisis of faith she endured knowing that she would inevitably lose Miranda, and the experience of grandparenting a young child who has lost his mother. She has a lot of wisdom to share, and I believe you'll be blessed by listening in. Hi, Susan. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, Jill. I have really looked forward to this time with you.
Yes, I have been looking forward to it too. Our girls have a lot of similarities and commonalities in their stories, and I am looking forward to talking with you about that. But before we do, let's give you an opportunity to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself. Tell us where you're from and what life is like for you there.
Well, my husband Brett and I live in Rockwall, Texas. It's a community east of Dallas. We're about to celebrate our 42nd wedding anniversary. We're the parents of Miranda, who is now in heaven, and Mitchell. Mitchell and his wife Cassidy have a little boy now. His name is Denver. He's 2.5, so it's a very fun age. And then there's Jackson, who'll be turning 14 next week, and he is Miranda's son. Both of my grandboys call me Mimi. And Brett's retired now from corporate world, but he and Mitchell own our family business, Morrison Guitar Shop here in Rockwall, and I am the office manager. I enjoy the fact that one boss calls me Hun and the other one calls me Mom.
Yeah, that's a lot of family togetherness, which is a good thing, I hope.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great.
It is most of the time.
Right, exactly. Well, that's great. I love that. So we're here today to talk about Miranda. Take just a few minutes and tell us about her. Help us get to know her a little bit.
Well, if I could describe her in one word, it would be effervescent. She was just a very joyful, positive person. I've had people tell me that they remember her laugh, especially. She was really outgoing and just very easy to be around. In fact, she was so easy that she gave Brett and I a false sense of confidence in our parenting skills. She was definitely all the things that you would consider as girly girl. She played the flute in middle school. She could play piano by ear, which really frustrated her piano teacher. She was tall. She had blue eyes and curly blonde hair. She was really pretty. She was a nominee, in fact, for the Best Smile Award her senior year in high school. And she wasn't much of an athlete, but she did participate in cheerleading and drill team. Miranda was never one to get in much of a hurry. She was never really rushed, but she did have a sense of adventure. She was brave and courageous, and life was just a big celebration for her. And one time I remember dropping her off at church camp, and I stood on the sidewalk waiting for her to come to the window to wave goodbye. But no, she as soon as she stepped on the bus, she was ready for fun. Miranda attended Texas Tech University, where she met her husband, Spencer, and they got married in 2007. She graduated in 2009 and had Jackson in 2010. So when she got sick in 2011, they were still living in Lubbock so that Spencer could finish his schooling.
Wow, she sounds like such a fun-loving, exciting person to get to know. I love your word effervescent. That just helps me picture her and kind of get to know who she really was. So at what point, you mentioned that she got sick. At what point did you realize that something was going on with Miranda health-wise?
In hindsight, my mother's intuition knew something was wrong about 8 weeks before her diagnosis. Miranda was very creative, and she had planned every detail of Jackson's first birthday party in April. She had plans for the invitations, the plates and the napkins. All of that was going to be cute. It was all going to be matchy, and she would call me every day from Lubbock to give me an update on all the things that she had done to get ready for this party. But the night they arrived in Rockwall, when I greeted her at the door, something just felt really off to me, and I immediately thought, what is going on with her? She just didn't seem like herself. She looked really weary. And over the next few days with us, she described this chronic headache. She slept a lot. And I just kind of thought, well, she was a barista at Starbucks at the time. And because she and Spencer were both doing shift work to avoid daycare. So we thought it was because of her weird schedule that she just wasn't getting caught up on her sleep. She had gotten all the items ready for Jackson's birthday party, as I mentioned, but she had forgotten them back in Lubbock. And that was just strange. Wow. And really, I kind of thought, I kept waiting for her to bounce back. She just didn't seem like a typical young postpartum mommy. She had had high blood pressure during the pregnancy, so while she was home with us, she visited our family doctor about this ongoing headache, but her blood pressure was fine. So the doctor simply gave her a prescription for pain meds and told her to see her PCP back in Lubbock if this headache persisted. But she didn't have a doctor in Lubbock. She wasn't particularly motivated in finding one, as they had already decided to move back home as soon as Spencer finished his spring semester. So she was just trying to manage these headaches until she got back home to her own doctor again. But then back in Lubbock, she started having double vision out of one eye, and she made an appointment to get her eyes checked. Kind of strangely, the ophthalmologist didn't see anything alarming, so he prescribed glasses, and she was hopeful that these glasses were going to be helpful. But by the time the glasses were ordered and she got them, her vision had worsened even more. So she, obviously didn't wear the glasses. And so by then we were really puzzled what was going on. She had this just ongoing fatigue. She was really, really sleepy. She started having a little bit of nausea with those headaches. And she was beginning to call me sometimes by the hour. And one day I counted 12 phone calls from her. And I remember her saying, "Mom, I'm really getting worried about my health." It was when she woke up from a nap one afternoon that her cheek and her tongue were both numb. And of course, I told her to go straight to the emergency room because I thought she was having a stroke. Sure. And they did a CAT scan then, and that's when they found the tumor. I immediately flew to Lubbock, and when I arrived, the doctors, escorted me to the nurse's station to show me the imaging. And I'm not a nurse, but I knew enough from working in doctors' offices that what I was looking at was invasive and that it was most likely cancer. The radiology report said it looked like glioblastoma, which I was familiar with. Brett had a friend who had passed away from that several months prior, so we knew how aggressive this kind of cancer was and its dire prognosis. And as we were leaving the hospital, she said, "Mom, does this mean that I'm going to die?" And I said, "Well, let's hope for the best, but plan for the worst." The ER doctors already had a neurosurgeon lined up in Dallas for us. We were to report the very next morning. So we had about 45 minutes to throw together their little family's, clothes and essentials into backpacks and grocery sacks and drive to Dallas. And that was the last time Miranda ever saw Lubbock. She loved her time there. She especially loved her time at Texas Tech. But anyway, because her condition was so dangerous, she was only one of 2 surgeries performed that Memorial Day in that hospital. And the final pathology report came back as grade 3 anaplastic astrocytoma. And we were told to go ahead, get her affairs in order, as this was an aggressive cancer that would definitely turn into glioblastoma, and that she might have 18 months to live. And at the time of diagnosis, she was 26 years old, and baby Jackson was 13 months.
Wow. And so you knew when they said glioblastoma, or you read it in that report, how serious that was.
I did. I did.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was much of a blessing or not, but I knew what we were dealing with. There was they told us one time this was not a cancer that you could ever say the word remission, that it was very invasive and very aggressive.
Yeah. Of course, Hannah's story and Miranda's story parallel in that Hannah was also diagnosed with glioblastoma. Hers was a glioblastoma grade 4 when they found it. Mm-hmm. But we had no idea of what that diagnosis meant. Right. So it's hard for me to imagine going into it knowing that.
Oh yes. Yeah. Again, I don't know if that was a blessing or not.
Right.
Because we knew immediately. It was as if the rug had been pulled out from under us, because it was terminal right away.
Yeah. Yeah. And so how did you respond in those early weeks after that diagnosis?
We were just devastated. Here was this young wife with a husband and a 1-year-old baby. It was just inconceivable. There were a lot of questions in my mind. How long do we have? What does the end of glioblastoma look like? How much is she going to suffer? How am I going to help her with her grief while carrying my own? And initially, Miranda, again, being a very positive person, she just could not even digest really what the prognosis was. And I remember her saying one time, she had such confidence that she was going to beat this thing. And she said, I know I'm going to be okay, because why would God bring a baby into this world just to take away his mama? So, that was hard. And after discharge from that first surgery, she ended up having 2 surgeries, but after that first surgery, they came to live with us. And again, they had just left their life that they knew in Lubbock very quickly. And so they had to come live with us. And actually, they ended up being there for 2 years. But initially, my thinking was, how is my son-in-law going to make a living? He hadn't finished college. He was 28 years old. Did he have what it takes to go the distance? Was he going to go to the grocery store and not ever come back? I mean, this was hard. And of course, we had some ideas that maybe, are we going to end up raising Jackson? And I will say too, Jill, that I kind of selfishly, I thought back on all the hard work and sacrifice of raising Miranda. And I thought, was all of that in vain? You think about all of those years of schooling and activities and church attendance and braces and camp and music lessons and prom and boyfriends. We had a wedding. She had just earned a college degree that we knew she would never be able to use. And we'd accomplished so much. And she was at the point that all of her hard work was about to come to fruition. All of our hopes and dreams for her really kind of died that day that we got the diagnosis. So our grief for Miranda's life started before we ever lost her.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. I would think one of the things that would make it really difficult as well is at 26 years old, your daughter has kind of gone from being your child to being your best friend. Sounds like you guys talk to each
Oh,
other every
absolutely.
day. I'm sure you were walking with her as she was raising Jackson. What was that like?
Well, that is something that now and that I have really missed.
Yeah.
But the one thing, and we kind of followed Miranda's lead a little bit because I've been around a lot of bereaved parents. There is no good timing, and there's no better timing, I guess I could say, in how you lose your child, either suddenly
Right.
or expected. And people assume that we had this long goodbye. I mean, we had a long goodbye, but we followed Miranda's lead, and she just wanted to be a normal mom. She wanted to squeeze out normal life as long as she could. And so we followed that lead, and as long as she was fighting, we were going to be fighting too. And we were not going to, we just did not want to precede that. We didn't want to go ahead of that. We followed her direction on that.
Right.
But we didn't have this, movie type of, goodbye necessarily. I think at the end, we did have some conversation with her. She actually was in our home the last 9 weeks of her life, and we did have a conversation. She was not verbal at the time, but we did tell her that we would do what we could to take care of her boys, So, but as far as a formal goodbye, we always followed her lead. She hung on. She was fighting for that son of hers,
Oh, sure. Yeah, we did that with Hannah as well. We followed her lead as far as what she wanted to talk about and those kinds of things. And it's just really difficult. It's a tough journey that you make as a parent, walking your child home.
Yes. Holding on while letting go.
Yes, exactly. That's a good way to describe it. When you shared your story at the retreat, you said that you made some decisions in the wake of Miranda's death. What were those decisions?
Well, the most vivid memory I have of that time is that I had an absolute crisis of faith that really surprised me. There has never been a day in my life that I can remember that I didn't believe that Jesus loves me. But this didn't feel like love. It didn't feel like love for me or for Miranda, and especially for that sweet baby of hers.
Yeah.
I had that big why question on a loop. Miranda had accepted Jesus as her Savior at a young age. She lived her life in obedience. She had done all the right things. So then what I wrestled with was maybe God is punishing me for some reason. And in a very real way, I felt like I was in a spiritual battle. I felt like Miranda was fighting for her life as I was fighting for my very soul. And there was a darkness that set in very quickly. I think, Jill, that bereaved parents must surely be the most vulnerable prey to Satan's attacks.
Absolutely.
I felt very separated from God. It was, this tornado of anger and fear and doubt all at once. And it was just too much to bear. I totally shut down. And friends and family noticed that I was absolutely paralyzed. But I started receiving these texts of scriptures from my friends, and I later named them my word warriors. I couldn't tell you today what scriptures they were, but I do remember that my soul recognized truth before my mind did. And having them spoon feed me God's word made me strong enough to fight back. And I knew that I had a decision to make. This hard thing was going to happen. We couldn't stop it. And I just had to make a decision. Am I going to do this with God or without Him? And I could tell pretty quickly that my strength just was not going to get it. And I'll say that today I have a dependence on God now that I never had before.
Yeah. How did you work through that thought that God was punishing you?
Well, I really do think that these scriptures, that is truth. And you can't argue with truth.
That's right.
And I do believe, again, that when I read those scriptures and those texts, and I'm saying these were several of my friends, I would get these scriptures throughout the day for weeks. And again, I would read them, and it was almost like I could recognize them, but I knew I was in a battle, and Satan really wants to attack our minds. That's the easiest place. That's the most vulnerable place. And so I will say again, I think the prescription for that is just to read God's word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's where the answers are. That's where we can find the answers for sure. So you just recently passed the 8-year mark since Miranda went to heaven. How has your grief evolved over that time?
Well, it's been 8 years since Miranda left this earth, but our most acute grief was, again, that 13 years ago when we received the terminal diagnosis that we talked about. But in addition to the immediate loss of hopes and dreams at diagnosis, we had to prepare to physically let her go. And people don't talk too much about anticipatory grief and how hard that is to navigate. But, we knew it was just a matter of time before Miranda's cancer would return. And it was almost like we could hear the clock ticking. We just didn't know how much time we had left. And then, as you know, Jill, the anxiety of every scan and every image and every report, we were on a roller coaster of emotions. And again, she was just trying to stay alive. She wanted more than anything just to be a normal young mama and enjoy her little family. So we were trying to do normal the best we could, but it was under some really hard conditions. Miranda actually outlived about 90% of those with the same diagnosis. That was according to her oncologist. And so, she lived about another 4.5 years beyond diagnosis. And she was, again, always one who celebrated life to the fullest. But one thing that she did is she put a really strong emphasis on holidays and gatherings. It was almost like she wondered, is this going to be the last one? Is this the last Thanksgiving? Is this the last birthday? Is this the last Christmas? And I do remember, of course, we wanted to join in on that enthusiasm to a certain degree, but there was a lot of forced festivity. And there was one thing that, I just dreaded so much. And it was kind of a weird phenomenon for me as a parent, but it was at New Year's Eve. And it would be, everyone would say, "Oh, Happy New Year." And, they were looking at the year ahead. And I was looking at a blank calendar and wondering, is this going to be the year that we lose Miranda? But really, I guess to answer your question about how grief has evolved since she left, to be honest, we find that we now grieve for Jackson's mother more than we grieve for our own daughter. We're just so heartsick that she's not here for him. And he was only 5 when she left, so he did not get a lot of her influence in his life. We were told after Miranda died by counselors and teachers that, he would experience fresh grief at different stages of his childhood, of course, as he matures and he understands what has happened. And we honestly thought, well, that's good. We will have done our own hard grief work and we'll be able to help him. But what we've learned, and I think God is so good sometimes to not show us what's going to happen. But we've learned that when it's fresh for him, it becomes fresh for us again too. And, it's one thing to imagine how parent loss is for a child, but it's entirely different when you can see the tangibles. And I have sat through some real, some teary conversations with him, and that hurts my heart. He especially regrets that he never really got to know his mom. and that what memories he does have of her is that she was so very sick. And he recently said to me, I just missed the good stuff. And anyway, but he does have a hindsight now of how his childhood has been impacted. He starts high school next year. And so he's very mature. And a lot of times I feel like I'm talking to another adult. And anyways, but he does have that maturity now. He kind of realizes how not having one of his greatest advocates in his life, what that has done. Now, his dad has done a great job. Don't get me wrong. He's done the best to his ability. And we as grandparents have done what we can to feed into him. But there's just a very special place in a child's life that only a mommy can fill. Now, I will say that with Jackson again, he's witnessed my work in Hope Dawning, which I know that we're going to talk about in a minute, but he knows that grief is an open topic in our home, so he is free to talk. We tell a lot of stories, and Mitchell has been very, very good. Uncle Mitchell has been very good to share funny stories, especially about Miranda. But I'm sure that her name is going to come up a lot in the coming years. Before we know it, he's going to be driving and dating and choosing colleges and all of that. So yeah, her name is going to be frequent, I'm sure, in our home.
Yeah, as it should be. I love that you guys are bringing him up in that way where she is still such a part of his life, just the memories and all of those things that you all talk about together. And I love that you have the opportunity to be so involved in his life. It's not always that way with grandparents after an adult child dies.
Absolutely. Yeah. We are very blessed that way. Yes.
Yeah. That's a huge blessing. So what advice would you give to a newly bereaved parent, somebody who might be listening, who's right at the very beginning of their grief journey?
Okay, Jill. I will say my first piece of advice is if you're emotional because someone you love has just lost a child, please avoid giving advice. I really blew this. I blew this a couple of years ago. Epic fail. Cringe-worthy. We had dear friends who lost their 22-year-old daughter in a car accident, and the news just really was a gut punch to me. And I was so sad for them. And for some reason, even after ministering to bereaved moms for 6 years and knowing the damage an untimely word can have, for some reason, I felt compelled, really kind of in their first hours, I felt compelled to forewarn these dear family friends a couple of things that I would have liked to have known that would ambush me. And I really kind of projected my experience onto them, which I realized. But I thought, man, I need to forewarn them because it's going to happen. And this, I would have appreciated someone telling me what these struggles would be. So I wouldn't feel so crazy, that I would feel like this, that I would know that this is a normal part of grief. But anyway, I don't recall my exact words. But one thing that I did say to them was not to be surprised at how offended you're going to be by some of the things that people say. And again, I wish someone had forewarned me about this, because even when I knew they were speaking the truth, such as Romans 8:28, my heart was just hurting too much to take it in. And then I would just I'd feel very guilty and shameful. And I just wish somebody had told me that was a natural, part of grieving. Another thing I addressed with them that I regret most of all is that we'll probably at some point bump into anger with God even. I think most of us kind of deal with that in some form or fashion at some point because, we believe in the sovereignty of God, and that question of why did he allow this? What about my prayers of protection over my children? I've even heard some moms say, why couldn't my child be the success testimony over addiction? All of that. And I think for some parents, it's just a brief hiccup. But for me, it's still kind of an occasional battle. I think mine tends to surface often because of Jackson. So that was on part of my emotions in talking with them, was that my own emotions, were kind of at the surface in what I'm dealing with. But anyway, I love Jill. I remember when we were at the While We're Waiting retreat, and one thing that you mentioned is that, you can be angry, but not live angry. And in fact, I checked with Brett on that last night. I said, I think that we've done that well. And he said, yeah, it doesn't mean that we don't wrestle with anger, but I do hope anyway that we are still living in obedience. And, I think about the fact that anger doesn't come as a surprise to God. He felt it very important to include it in, stories about such thing in the Bible. I think of the book of Psalms, for instance, and you see that all through that book, that there's that juggling anger, yet relying on him to save us from that pit of despair. And you can see the pattern of communication with God, a dependence on him for help. So, even though you're angry with God, ultimately, you're dependent on him and that he's your only hope, So my advice would be to turn towards him rather than away from him, because he truly is near to the brokenhearted. And lastly, I'll say this, and I did not mention this to my family friends, but I would say that once you're out of the freshest grief, because initially you're just trying to breathe and get out of bed. But once you're out of that freshest grief, try to make intentional decisions to choose life and to savor the present moment the best that you can. And a lot of that really is for the sake of your surviving children. I didn't always accomplish this, but I did try to make it a priority that Mitchell never felt that Miranda's absence was more important than his presence.
That's right. What a good line that is. I love that. That's something we all need to remember as bereaved parents, because it's very tempting to kind of build our identity and build our life around that child that has left, to the detriment of the child or children that we might have left behind.
Exactly.
So I think that's important. Don't let her absence overshadow his presence. Yeah.
Right.
Very good. Thank you. That's very helpful. This concludes the first half of my conversation with Susan Morrison. Be sure to come back next week as Susan shares more of her story, including the experience of losing her only sibling as a teenager. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to sharing the rest of our chat with you next Wednesday.